Hi, and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Surface. Your host here, Wendell Badrie, and I do hope that we're finding you in the best of health and strength, as usual, of course. If you haven't taken your jab, we've been reminding you time and time again to ensure that you get vaccinated, all right? It is important that you do for your own safety and those around you. Yes, your loved ones. It's important or imperative that we put the health of ourselves and our loved ones at the front burner. So ensure that you get jabbed. And of course, we still encourage you to wear your mask and maintain social or physical distancing, I prefer to say, and, follow the guidelines with regard to the pandemic situation. Joining me on the program today is Opposition Member of Parliament and Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs, Amanza Desir. And we are here to talk about, among other things, the migrant crisis in the country. We will also be looking at a statement that was released by a congressman recently. We'll be brushing over electoral reforms, the regional security team, and a host of other things that are pertinent to you and I. So ensure that you stay tuned right here to today's edition of Beyond the Surface. Allow me to introduce my guest to you. And without further ado, Amanza Desir. Hello, Mrs. Desir, and how are you today?
Hello, Wendell. Thank you for having me. I am well. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure having you, as a matter of fact. I usually
it's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the interruption, but I usually start my program off by asking my guests if they've gotten jabbed as yet. So, in your case, have you gotten jabbed?
Yes, I have had my first dose of the Sputnik. I am amongst those Guyanese who are awaiting an announcement as to when we'll be able to receive the second dose. So, yeah, we support vaccination. Of course, you're aware that we would have had some recent revelations as it relates particularly to the Sputnik V vaccine, and we would have called for the use of that vaccine to be suspended pending us being able to verify, what it is that we would have received, given all of the issues surrounding the procurement of that vaccine. Right. And so I'll take the opportunity to say categorically that we are not anti-vaxxers. We do not have an anti-vaccination campaign. In fact, we encourage vaccination, but what we have asked the government to do is to suspend the use of that particular batch of Sputnik V vaccines that are in question. The government does have access to AstraZeneca, which is WHO approved. They also have access to the Sinopharm vaccine, which I learned has also been approved by the WHO. And so, no, we do not subscribe to that message that they are putting out there that we are against vaccination.
Well, since we're on that subject, Mrs. Desir, if I may call you that, whichever you prefer, the Russian Federation, I believe it is, subsequently released a report certifying those vaccines, saying that, they're authentic. The batch is authentic.
No. What was released to the public, and this is after the leader of the opposition would have written to the Minister of Health, Frank Anthony. What was released to the public was a letter from the DFID Corporate Center. What we subsequently said is that our investigations have shown that the person who would have signed that letter is nowhere in the management team, structure, or else of the DFID. And all that we did was do a simple Google search. And so information is out there, and we have a duty to continue to bring the information to the people. And so that confirmation as it stands has not come.
Are we saying that information
from the DFID?
Is misleading?
I am saying that information is patently misleading. I am saying that. And the Minister of Health has not discharged the burden of satisfying concerned Guyanese that they have taken steps to verify the authenticity of what it is that we have on our hands. I will say that if we were to assume that that letter is authentic, in that letter, in the last paragraph, I believe it says that all of the information, the batch numbers, certificate of analysis, the packing information, all of that information was sent with the shipment. It stands to reason that it ought to be in the possession of the Minister of Health.
Right.
We have asked for that information to be released to the public, and it is yet to be forthcoming.
Why wouldn't they want to release it?
I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you. I could speculate that they intend to play political games with the lives of Guyanese, because if your motivation is the preservation of Guyanese lives and for us to curb this COVID-19 pandemic, then transparency has to be the name of the game. You must be able to say, this is the information, my Guyanese people. Now you have all the information necessary to make informed decisions about your health and about your well-being and about the health and well-being of your family. So it is mystifying to me that they would not want to release that information. And, you know, if you look across the world, Wendell, what you're seeing is that the manner in which vaccines are procured is an issue. In Slovakia, the same DFID, same Krystyakov character supplied that country with vaccines, and the health minister stepped down when the scandal broke. You look at Brazil, you see that there's an ongoing investigation that has caused the suspension of the vaccination program. And so it is important that Guyanese people understand that we're just not making a mountain out of a molehill. The manner in which vaccines are procured is important because you have to be satisfied about chain of custody. You have to be satisfied that it was transported in the conditions that would preserve its potency.
Right.
All of this information is necessary. And so I think Guyanese people must understand that we are demanding more on their behalf, and that the government must be forthcoming with the information.
Of course, you just confessed that you've taken your first dose of the said vaccine, the Sputnik.
Absolutely. I took my
concerned?
first dose. I am concerned. I took my first dose some time before the revelation came that these vaccines were actually procured through a middleman. You recall that Parliament had not been convened for in excess of 90 days.
Right.
And so we did not have the ability to question. So the very day Parliament was convened, we questioned this expenditure. And then is when we were told that these vaccines were procured not directly from the Russian government, because when vaccines are procured through a government-to-government arrangement, there are issues of reciprocity, etc., that apply that will give the public some assurance. But when you go through a middleman, all of that goes through the door. And so that is the gravity of the situation. And that is what we're asking Guyanese people to understand, that as the opposition, we are attempting to bring you the information so that you can make informed decisions and choices.
Beautiful. And then, of course, we learned through your line of questioning in the National Assembly by your in the opposition that the vaccine was sourced from, not only the Sheikh, but someone who is closely associated to him and who is also facing charges in another country for fraud.
In several countries, in fact. And so there's just a whole lot of, I would want to say, shadiness about the procurement process. And so we have concerns. We have concerns because, as you know, Guyanese would have paid 130% more than the price set on the world market for these vaccines. And so it is important that people understand that those are taxpayers' dollars and that the government must be held to account for the expenditure that they incur.
My final question on this subject, Ms. Desir. Do you think that anyone on the face of this earth would deliberately try to, pass on fake vaccines?
Of course.
For what reason?
Well, I am guided by my beliefs that, the heart of man can sometimes be desperately wicked. And the fact is that investigations in Mexico and Guatemala, I think it is, have uncovered fake Sputnik vaccines. And so,
So the evidence is there. No question.
So the evidence is there. So this is not things that we are pulling out of thin air. We are guided by these investigations. And, you know, we would love to believe the best of each other as human beings. But the reality is that there are predators. And given this issue with vaccines, we are seeing where people have profiteered billions of dollars. And so this is why the government of Guyana, what they should be advocating for instead of concluding backdoor deals, is for things like vaccine equity and lobbying and using their voice on the international arena to ensure that organizations like the WHO, etc., ensure that developing states, small developing nations, have access to the vaccine.
Very well. Of course, I'd like to move on to something that recently took place. Just, let me get my date correct. It's July 29th. July 29th, your colleague, Member of Parliament, Annette Ferguson, who also was the former Minister of Housing, was arrested based on a cybercrime matter, where she allegedly uttered some remarks about an official within the GDF, you know, purporting that that person will be leading quote-unquote killing squad. What's your reaction to that whole scenario? And then, of course, your legal counsel.
It's troubling. It's troubling because it is clearly, in my view, political harassment. And I say that because of my own personal experience. A few months ago, a very prominent member of society, a former ethnic relations commissioner, called for me to be marked and called for my home to be picketed and for my family to be made uncomfortable. Now, I would have made a report based on the Cybercrimes Act, and to date, he is yet to be called in for questioning. And so it is the selective application of the law.
Allow me to interject here. Is it the same thing? Is it the same thing? Let's compare what took place. So this person called, you mentioned the scene already. Miss Ferguson said, and we already quoted, is it the same thing?
I think making an allegation of somebody heading a squad is far less injurious than you calling for somebody to be marked, and repeatedly so on social media. And it's not to downplay one against the other, but in terms of the gravity of the situation, you and I understand in colloquial terms what it means to mark somebody. All right? And so the fact that you would not have called, and this is an individual, mind you, that has the means to execute this. And so the fact that you have not even bothered to call him for questioning, but based on something you allege a member of parliament has said about heading up an organization, you arrest her and charge her. It smacks of harassment because it shows very clearly that some are more equal than others. And if we continue down this path, we are on the precipice. And it appears as though the PPPC is interested in taking a giant leap forward.
You remind me immediately of a great writer and, screenplay, etc. Playwright, George or William, I think.
Oh, yes, of course.
Some animals are equal.
Some are more equal than others.
Yeah.
And, the point has to be made, Wendell, that we have to, as a society, begin to move away from the tit-for-tat politics, understanding that will never get Guyana to where she has to go in terms of development. And we have to begin to demand that our leaders on both sides of the political divide move away from that type of leadership.
Right. Coming back to the matter with Ms. Ferguson, you said it smacks of victimization and, harassment and so on.
Yes.
In your matter, there has been no outcome.
Absolutely no outcome. The gentleman has not even been called in for questioning.
What do you think will come out of the matter with Ms. Ferguson?
I I do not want to speculate, but I have seen that the PPPC, when they put their mind to victimizing someone, there is no extent to which they will not go.
You believe the PPP is behind the move?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
No doubts.
I have no doubt about it. I have no doubt about it.
Why would they do it?
Why would who do what?
The PPP. Why would they want to?
Because the PPPC, in my opinion, comes from an ideological perspective of they are intent on dominating this society. In a multi-ethnic society such as ours, governance is usually approached in one of two mindsets. One, you either look at shared governance with an understanding that while we have our cultural ethnic differences, this is one space. We have to live together in it. And so we will do everything to ensure that we are able to coexist peacefully. The other option is domination by one group over the other. And it is very, very clear that the PPP has chosen the latter. And so to do that, what you have to do is that you have to engage in such psychological warfare. You have to demean, you have to dehumanize, you have to embarrass, you have to victimize those who would oppose you because they are bent on dominance. And I say that without fear of apology. They are bent on dominating this society and imposing their way, their will. But I think that they will be shocked that the people of Guyana will not have it so. Because we are literally tired of that. It has been 50-something years and we have not begun to scratch the surface of our potential. And so we're not going to be dragged down that road again. I don't think that we are going to allow it.
Very well. In the matter of Ms. Ferguson again,
No,
because it's very pertinent.
It absolutely is. I agree.
Yeah. Of course, we want to know whether there's any merit to the case at all. Any merit at all. Do you think that she actually, knowingly and consciously and deliberately violated any laws, any...
I am not convinced that that is the case. I'm not convinced that that is the case. I believe that the PPPC has demonstrated that they are prepared to bend, contort, twist, and downright undermine the rule of law. And it is not a stretch of one's imagination, given the machinations we've seen recently with the Police Service Commission, that they are intent on exercising absolute dominance over the coercive arms of the state. There's no question about it. We're not in the realm of supposition anymore. And the fears of Guyanese concerning this joint regional support team is well-founded. We've had experience with these types of groups and the havoc that they brought to our society. And so if people are concerned, people have a right to be concerned. And the Constitution of Guyana gives one certain parameters of freedom of expression. And I do not believe that she would have breached any of those. But again, like I said, the PPPC is prepared to do what they must to bend the people to their will.
And of course, I'd want to conclude on this matter by just to be on the safe side. Are you saying that she is innocent of the crime that is being levied against her? I
have not seen any evidence that she has committed a crime.
So then she's innocent.
Well, this is what I'm saying. I have not seen any evidence that she has committed a crime. I believe that it is just downright harassment of a political figure that they deem to be in opposition to them.
Very well. I had a list of questions in a particular order, but I tell you what, based on, some of your revelations a short while ago, I'll have to skip that order and
That's
jump
right.
to our very next question.
I am at your convenience for the next
Yeah?
few minutes.
Sure. So you mentioned shared governance, and we want to talk a little bit about electoral reform and how that model could come into place. But before we get to that, you shared your speculations about the regional security team. Let's talk a bit about that. What are your reservations, or what are your thoughts about the regional security team?
My reservations are based on the fact that when we asked questions in the National Assembly, we could not get clear answers.
But then the Honorable Minister of Governance and Parliamentary Affairs did say that it is a matter of national security, I think it is.
Yes, but then she also said that it is a matter of crime fighting. So it cannot be both.
Okay.
Because crime fighting falls squarely in the remit of the Guyana Police Force.
Right.
Constitutionally.
Right.
So you say that first when you are questioned, and then when you realize that that does not hold water, you revert to national security because you understand that there are parameters outside which you cannot go in terms of interrogating matters of national security. And so what the manner in which they have gone about answering the questions is what leads one to believe that there's much more in the matter. Much, much more. Because the lines are clear. And what you are attempting to do is to blur the lines. And when you begin to blur the lines that are constitutionally set out, you are heading down a dangerous path. And so it is our duty to stop that before it gets going. And so we will continue to expose it. We will continue to express our reservations. And mind you, the opposition in the National Assembly are not the only people that have come out to express reservations about this. You'll see a number of opinions written in the newspapers, notable political commentators like
you had Dr. David Hines,
Dr. Hines,
Dr.
Henry Jeffrey, and all of these people.
Vishnu
And
Bandhu.
they have the benefit of experience and history. And so I don't believe that all of us are crying wolf. I do not believe that. I believe that our fears are justified given the pre-2015 experiences that we would have had.
Could you just remind us of that experience? I would like it for it to be explicit.
No, because if you recall those were what we called it the dark days, right? When you had extrajudicial operations that resulted in hundreds, if not over 1,000, young Afro-Guyanese men or Afro-Guyanese men being slaughtered. These are facts. These are historical facts. You had one drug lord operating with impunity in cahoots with a sitting government minister. And so these are facts. These are not things that we're plucking out of thin air. And so one would think that given these experiences that we would tend to be a bit more cautious in how we approach this. And so we will continue to flag it. We will continue to speak on it because the government has to be held accountable.
Are you saying that this team, regional security team, it mirrors the same situation that we just referred to? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that it has the potential.
It has the potential
to evolve into that. And because there is no transparency, there is no accountability, there is no information forthcoming, the government itself opens itself up to speculation as to what their motives are, because it has the potential to disintegrate into something like that.
I'm also hearing that you're saying we don't need a regional security team, do we?
In my view, if you should strengthen the police force and you strengthen the army, there are mechanisms available where the two can complement each other. There are standard operating procedures for that. SOPs are in place for that kind of activity. So this is not new and uncharted ground in terms of collaboration between the police and the military. So All of these are reasons why a lot of Guyanese are uneasy about this direction that the government has chosen to take.
But then, Ms. Desir, there are proferations out there, I'm sure you understand, of the police force being, and I really don't want to use this word, but a corrupt entity. So then, how do we treat with that?
Well, you see, you can make allegations of the police being corrupt, but I think the events of the last few weeks have clearly indicated who are the corruptors.
You're
you have a
talking about
sitting
the PSC.
president that calls to interfere with the work of a constitutional body to determine who must be promoted over whom. The rot starts from the head. And if the government displays a proclivity to interfere in that manner, then they're basically saying to the Guyanese that everything else is fair play. So you cannot want to be corrupting the operations of the police force and then turn around to condemn them for corruption. As the young people say, you have to pick a struggle. It is either you're going to insist that the police force operate in a professional manner and you respect the integrity of constitutional bodies set up to make sure that that happens. Or you are not going to. You cannot have it both ways.
All right. Then, of course, on the same issue of the regional security team, we saw, close to $700 million being requested to outfit for, or to quote, the team. And the Honorable Minister did see that when she spoke about uniforming the team, she wasn't necessarily speaking about clothing and, that sort. She was speaking about all the equipment that they need to carry out their functions. Again, what do you make of that?
So then why isn't there a line item for equipment?
May I reciprocate?
Yeah, well, this is just the obvious question. Yeah. Uniforms are uniforms are uniforms. That is what the line item says. Just like how the Minister of Home Affairs can come to ask for motorcycles for crime fighting. What prevents it from being a line item?
To list specifically
equipment. And then you can indicate, look, this equipment is for national security, and therefore you draw the parameters around the depth of questioning that could be entertained. But to try to insult our intelligence to say that uniform is intended to cover all of this that you can't speak about is really disingenuous. Really is disingenuous.
There was also the question about buildings. There was
buildings
that
buildings
would
in
have
every
to be
region
rented.
and so on and so forth. So
but then someone raised the point that there are many government buildings that are not in use in many of the regions.
And so the point is, Wendell, I think both you and I are arriving at the same conclusion that a lot becomes unclear when the requisite level of interrogation is applied to the issue. And so you understand why people could come away with these conclusions.
So then the obvious question now, how should Guyanese feel about this? How should they react to it? What should they do?
Guyanese have to begin to insist that the government, the sitting government, installed albeit they may be, that they must respect the Constitution. They must respect the roles clearly delineated in the Constitution. It is the right and prerogative of every Guyanese to hold every government accountable, any government, whether it be the APNUAFC or the PPPC. And so they must begin to speak up and to speak out, because these developments are troubling. And when you take all of the developments across the spectrum, it becomes even more concerning. You are interfering with the Police Service Commission in a very public and obvious way. You are setting up what appears to be a third force. It does not all go well. You simply have to be a student of history and you understand that these are signs that people are attempting to consolidate power and to subjugate the population. And Guyanese people must not have it.
Okay. I sense that you're getting to one word there.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on. You mentioned earlier about shared governance. Mm-hmm. You spoke about one political party seeking to dominate society. But then you said within the space that we live, we ought to understand that we ought to share it. It belongs to everyone. We had Congressman Johnson saying the same thing recently. The patrimony of Guyana is for all Guyanese. And so, how do we go about shared governance? I mean, we're in a period of electoral reform, which is, being rolled out by a number of bodies, the IRI included, the International Republican Institute. How do we go about shared governance? Is this something that we should include in our electoral reform, findings? Or?
I think on the issue of electoral reform, I think it has to be understood that at a fundamental level, electoral reform true electoral reform cannot be achieved without consensus. And so if the PPPC government believes that it will achieve electoral reform by simply imposing what it is that they wish to see, then I think they'll be sadly mistaken. Electoral reform is an important activity as a country seeks to become a more democratic state and society. And therefore it is important that at the outset, it's not a question of Wendell drafting what he wants and then bringing it to me to say, this is what I want. It is about Amanza and Wendell sitting at the table and saying, what is best for us in the circumstances?
A partnership.
And there's nothing wrong with healthy political competition. When there's healthy political competition, the people win. The people win. And at all times, I continue to say it to our people, do not lose sight of the fact that you have the power. You have the power. It might not be popular for a politician, and I'm still now becoming used to me being labeled a politician. It probably is not popular for a politician to say to the people, but my passion is about ensuring that our people understand that they have the power and you have the ability to make decisions for your life and to decide who you wish to govern and to decide if you wish that those in government must sit together at the table to come up with what is best for all of us, not just a sector or segment of society, but for all of Guyana. And so to start off electoral reform in the way, the manner the PPPC has done is a non-starter.
Okay. But you were part of the team that met with the IRI, the opposition team, that is.
Well, we requested a meeting with the IRI because we wanted to be briefed as to what their intentions were. And we communicated very clearly to them the reservations that the 50% of Guyanese that we were elected to represent had, as is our duty to do.
Do you mind sharing some of those reservations now?
Of course. You hear, and let's be very honest, you hear the Republican Institute. Immediately it conjures up images of the Trump-Pompeo regime and an extension.
Capital
this is what people say to us when we go into the field. And so we do not sit at the table to spout our own or to convey our own feelings. We actually do consult with our people. And they have said we are uncomfortable. And so it is for the IRI to determine how they will overcome that discomfort and suspicion. But they are very well apprised of the position of our people. I think we all agree that electoral reform is necessary. I think a very good first step would be a new voters list, because we know that numerically it is an impossibility, the numbers we are seeing. And so the list is severely bloated. And you know, I always say that if the PPPC were serious about electoral reform, they would do a meaningful thing, like revise the list. Why are you content to drag a bloated list forward? It makes no sense unless you are benefiting from such an anomaly. So, house-to-house registration, let's have a new voters list where we can purge those people who need to be purged, and we could move forward with a list that is reflective of the reality on the ground. But they do not wish to do that. What they will do is to make it personal and victimize officers of GCOM because they have the political power and ability to so do. But they must understand that they're not fooling anybody. Because when you sit and you analyze it, you realize, okay, so if you're really interested in reform, if you're really interested in democracy, cleanse the voters list.
I spoke with someone recently, I believe it was Dr. Henry Jeffrey, who said that the government should do the honorable thing and face the allegations of the elections petitions, which were filed by the APNU AFC. I'd like to pitch that question to you. Do you think that they should do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Why not? You claim that the other side are the riggers. What do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? Face it, and you could possibly put a nail in the coffin of the other side forever. Why not? You see?
But then again, had the shoe been on your foot, I wonder if you'd be saying the same thing.
I do not know, and I do not want to engage in that level of conjecture. But the question you posed to me was whether I think they should, and they absolutely should.
Right.
Right? They absolutely should. I mean, think of how much of a finality it could bring to all of this speculation. You know, and Gail Teixeira gets up and talks about we need to recognize the government as legitimate, then establish your legitimacy. Have the petitions heard. Like, what do you have to lose? And so again, I think that the PPPC is not understanding that we are a far more enlightened society. We are a far more knowledgeable society. And we are able to question, and because we are in the information age, information is available with a click of a button. And so they still are coming to grip with that reality.
Of course, since we're on the election petitions and I see us running away from electoral reform here, and of course shared governance, but you know, with regard to the election petitions, there were two, 88 and 99. 88 questioned the constitutionality of Order 60, Section 22, and Petition 99 leveled allegations of misconduct at the polls. So we saw the Attorney General, you know, filing notices of motion, and, you know, the likes to basically put those petitions to bed. Do you have faith in them being resurrected? They're currently at the Court of Appeal. Do you have faith in them being resurrected?
Well, I'm hopeful. I am hopeful because I think the courts must recognize that it has an important role to play in bringing and restoring order. And one of the ways that they can do that is to allow these matters to be ventilated to the fullest extent. Guyana could only be better for hearing and determining these cases. We can only be better, you know, and so I think it is important that our courts continue to be seized of that matter. I am hopeful that they are able to hear those matters. The lawyer in me is always very eager to see the growth of jurisprudence and to read the judgments, because as the law becomes more certain, you have a firmer foundation on which to build a nation. And so that certainty is why you take matters to the court to be established that this is the law, and you move forward from there. And this is why, for example, the PSC is going ahead with its work, the Police Service Commission, because the very Attorney General that is sitting now took a case to court that established the modus operandi of the PSC and its interactions with the executive. And so that was important then, because it set the groundwork as to how we are going to operate. And so in the same light, I think these petitions need to be heard. I think it will go a far way in clarifying the law.
Mm-hmm. On the matter of the PSC, you just alluded to it. The Constitution sets out how persons are to be either suspended or removed from office at that constitutional body. Do you think that the president violated those?
Absolutely.
He did?
Absolutely.
So what should happen now that he has violated?
I think the PSC has indicated that they'll be proceeding with their work.
But should the president, I know he is immune to certain things, but do you think that some sort of penalty should be instituted?
Against who? The president? Absolutely. He has violated a very fundamental tenet of the Constitution.
What should that penalty be?
I could not say, and I wouldn't want to speculate. But you see, this is why there are constitutional bodies. Because it is always about balancing power. You cannot complain that the PNC for 28 years had seized unto itself executive power, etc., etc. And when we take constitutional reform to make sure that constitutional bodies are able to function in the manner that the Constitution says that they must, you can't now cry about it. You simply have to follow what the Constitution says. And on the matter of constitutional agencies, this is the raison d'etre of these agencies, to make sure that there are guardrails set up so that you do not have a dictatorship. And when you dismantle those guardrails, you are on your way to a full-blown dictatorship, which is why it ought to be troubling for every Guyanese that the PPP's first order of business in the National Assembly was to strip these bodies of their financial independence.
Through the Financial Management...
Through the Fiscal Management and Accountability
Act.
Act, the amendment, which we have since challenged as unconstitutional. Because when in fact President David Granger assented to that law, he was perfecting, as it were, the provisions that required that these bodies be independent. The PPP has come and has used their majority to undo that. And so there's no getting around it. These are the facts. These are not speculations. We're not speculating. And so, yeah, they can't have it, as Guyanese say, you can't have it in cake and bake. No, yeah. You have to decide. It is either you are going to uphold the Constitution and you do it to the letter, or you are not. Because Guyanese, we are not unintelligent people. We can see how they're trying to maneuver. And I don't think it will work this time. It will not work.
Okay. We don't have much time remaining. We're almost out of time already. Wow. So I tell you what, I will combine these two questions that I had, and then I'll pitch them to you for a response. Recently, and I can't remember how recent it was, I believe it was December last year, Guyana sponsored a bill at the United Nations on racism, so to speak. It's a very long title, which I don't wish to recite at this forum.
It is, yes.
But basically to vote against racism in society, to stamp it out.
Xenophobia, etc.
Right? Yeah. So that happened, and then we saw a video being released which saw that Guyana voted against that resolution, whereas it was the sponsor of that very bill. So the two simply do not add up. First observation, and then we had Miss Caroline Rodriguez Burkett issuing a statement, the opposition, etc. We'd remember that. We'd recall that. Now we have what is being termed as a migrant crisis in the country, where the president recently ascended to, I think, or reversed a law, where CARICOM nationals from Haiti are now required to have a visa to enter the country.
Yeah.
Whereas we understand that in CARICOM countries, there is free movement, freedom of trade,
Right.
and the likes.
Right.
So my first question, have we violated any, any terms or so of CARICOM with regards to free movement within the region? Have we done so?
Well, I could say that at a minimum, we have violated the spirit of the revised treaty at a bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what you are seeing is this issue with the Haitians is but a manifestation of an underlying issue. And it raises more questions than answers, Wendell, because if you have these pressing concerns, now the PPP has against it the fact that when President Granger signed this into law, he was attacked as attempting to use Haitians to pad the voters list. Mm-hmm. The PPP said that. So we have established very firmly in their minds that they are concerned that the Haitians could represent or usher in a demographic shift. Out of their own utterances, one can conclude that. So they have that against them. Fast forward a few years, they have now been installed into government, and suddenly you have this ban on Haitians entering Guyana without a visa. A few things. In international relations, generally, such draconian action is not taken unless there are steps taken preceding that. And again, lack of transparency. There is no information in the public space. You're a journalist, you could bear me out, that there has been any bilateral engagement at the level of the Guyana government to the Haiti government on this issue. There's no information in the public space that has been done. There is no information that Guyana has engaged CARICOM on this issue. That information is not in the public space. And so the fact that you would not follow what in international relations is a normal procedure before you take such draconian action, you expose yourself to the accusations that what you are doing is purely racially motivated, because you have already established that you have in the back of your mind that these people might be able to occasion a demographic shift in the voting population. They may come, they may assimilate, and the assumption is that because they are of a certain ethnic origin, they will gravitate. And so that is the mindset of the PPP.
If I may, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's
if
all right.
If I may term it using one word, are you saying that it is racial?
It's racist, yes. I believe so. I believe so. And I believe that none of the terms or the fancy arguments that they're now attempting to conjure up displaces the fact that 3 or 4 years ago, they proposed racist arguments against Haitians being included.
But then we had the Attorney General recently positing that there's a huge human trafficking ring that is involving Haitians. Guyana is being used as a transshipment point, whereas they move on to perhaps greener pastures, Brazil, Suriname, French Guyana, the list continues. And he did say that there were complaints by those governments, Brazil, Suriname, I believe Cuba as well, I'm not sure, but I believe he did say that. You know, there have been complaints by those governments. He also proffered a number recently. He said some 40,000 Haitians entered Guyana between 2015 and 2020, or was it 2021, thereabout. However, of the 40,000, he's saying that only less than 5,000 left the country legally. which leaves us with a large number of Haitians either in the country or have moved on illegally. He also proffered that there was a group of Haitians, I believe 10 or so, or 30, I can't remember the exact number, that was found in a trail at Mabura or somewhere in Region 10 there. He mentioned about the 10, I remember that number, the 10 that were found in a hotel in Berbice, somewhere in Quarantine there. And among the large number in Region 10 that he spoke about, he said there were at least 2 children, 2 years of age. Now, there must be some sort of merit to that. Would you agree?
If it were the case that the Attorney General and the Minister of Foreign Affairs would have done what is normal in those circumstances, given all of this information, and that is to, at minimum, engage in bilateral talks on this issue, then I could perhaps give it credence. But you have not done that. You have not even engaged CARICOM to say, look, this is becoming a concern to us. You've just taken this draconian step. Their actions also beg the question, why do you further victimize the victims? What about the traffickers? If there's human trafficking, if there's human smuggling, there have to be traffickers and smugglers. What are you doing about that? Right? The question also arises, is it that it is only Haitians who are susceptible to human trafficking and smuggling? Is that what you are saying? And so I'm saying that because the AG's arguments, they fall down when properly interrogated, it brings you right back to what they said 4 years ago. What was on the forefront of their minds 4 years ago when President Granger, in the spirit of honoring our treaty obligations, allowed free movement of Haitians to Guyana. So, you know, it continues to be a case where, because the PPPC, I believe, lacks a national focus and interest, and their interest is very, very narrow, we will continue to see this instability in our international relations. We will continue to see the level of, as my colleague Kemraj would say, adhocracy. We will continue to see us bungling a lot of our very important international commitments because there is no national interest. All right? There ought to be the foreign, our local, domestic policy and our international policy that both come together to inform what the national interest is, or the national interest informs both of those. And so at every step, you will see action being taken, or you ought to see actions being taken on the international plane to advance what the national interest is. And because the PPP has a very defined and a very partisan interest, you're going to see this erraticism. We can expect more of it. We can absolutely expect more of it.
At this point, I wish to put you on the spot, if I may, to ask your definition of human trafficking or smuggling. What is your definition?
I couldn't give you the legal definition of the cuff. And you are putting me on the spot. I have to go dust off my law books. But of course, the difference between trafficking and smuggling does have to do with legal entry as one of the criteria. All right? So the element of smuggling has more to do with illegal entry, Trafficking, it is very possible that you can be admitted into a country with all of the legal requirements, but you are duped into working, into probably entering into prostitution and all of these things. And so that is the fine distinction that I would want to make so that members of our public could understand what it is that we're saying, what it is that we're talking about. But outside of the issues of definition, the Haitians are not the only population susceptible.
And that brings me to my very next preamble before the question.
Uh-huh.
So we see that the visa mechanism has been instituted for, reinstituted, if I may, for the Haitians. However, we have at least 3 groups of migrants in the country: Cubans, Venezuelans, Haitians. We heard what you said earlier regarding the Haitians, but then, and that is why I asked for your definition of trafficking and smuggling, because can we say for sure that the Venezuelans and the Cubans are here, are not being trafficked, are not being smuggled? Can we say that
Well, are
safely?
not here illegally in the context of being smuggled,
But then it
and
comes
are not
back,
being trafficked in the context of being here, but
Yeah.
not for the purposes for which they originally thought they were coming.
and then it comes back to why only the visa requirement for the Haitians, and why not the visa requirement for the Venezuelans as much as the Cubans?
And so I think you are making my point. I think you are making my point that the requisite level of interrogation reveals that it is purely motivated by the fact of the race of the Haitian people. Venezuelans have been accorded refugee status and all of the legal protections that come with that. Why can't that be extended to Haitians who may want to come here to do nothing but work, earn an honest living? And the statistics will show that Haitians who have migrated to Guyana and have settled here have not been involved in criminal activities. The police information will show you that. You contrast that with some of the other nationalities who have been here and who are not in receipt of those restrictions. And it tells a different story. And so we have to call a spade at the end of the day. I think what the government needs to be focusing on is an intelligent immigration policy for Guyana, because at the end of the day, we are a country of 750,000 people.
Or more by now.
Well, and this is why it's important that we have a census, and it's important that we cleanse the list, etc., so that we know the figures that we are working with. But the point is that you need population to support the economic growth. You need labor force. You do. And we do not have it. And so what the government ought to be putting its attention to is a responsive, dynamic immigration policy that sees a workforce that's properly trained, equipped, and in the numbers that can carry the economic development. That is where their energy should be, rather than victimizing the Haitians, who by and large come here and are hardworking, who take up the jobs that generally our own Guyanese may be slow to take up. And so those are my thoughts on that.
All right. I have maybe about 2 more questions or so, and then we will proceed to wrap up for today. But of course, I wish to remind you also, Ms. Desir, that a member of your very own camp, that is the former Minister of Citizenship, Winston Felix, did say on camera that the Haitians are coming here and leaving. We don't know whether legal or illegal. I don't believe that part was proffered, but he did say that on camera. I just wish to remind that. But coming back to the electoral reform issue, if I may jump to that.
No, but before you jump to that,
go ahead.
The issue is not whether they come and they leave. Guyana's concern is that there are no hurdles to them coming and that they come here legally. Right? There's free movement of skills in the CARICOM. So if I want to come and leave, as long as I am not running afoul of the laws of the land, that is the concern. So I just wanted to make that absolutely clear. And I think even though he proffered that, I think wisdom would have prevailed and the picture was looked at far more holistically. Hence, the law was signed into effect. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. It's important that we do not leave some of these things hanging.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah? All right. So, coming back to electoral reform, and forgive me, but I don't think you really, did justice to the question on shared governance. How do we go about it?
Look, I think it is something that will have to come organically because there are a number of models that can be crafted. I think what has to be first in place is the political will to do it. And so for me, it makes no sense us looking at models and how it could be done if there is an absence of political will. Because where there is a will, there will be a way. I think a healthy starting point would be for us to just respect the Constitution as it is right now. It makes very little sense you talking about constitutional reform if the will to respect what is in place and enforce as the law, if there's no will to respect that, what is the point? What are we doing? One could really ask, because you have a document in place. You have an amended constitution that was the product, if you recall, of serious constitutional reform. But you want to discard that. The president wants to interfere with the constitutional agencies. So whether Guyana, where are we going? We first must respect what is in place. And
I did have a question on referendum. I can't remember where I was supposed to stitch that in. I do remember saying, but it was an electoral reform.
Right.
And, yes, you did say that it's largely the will of the people. The will of the people must be respected. So do you think that electoral reform should go to a referendum?
Well, it's not even about it going to a referendum. It will have to be a continuous process of engagement involving the political parties, involving civil society. It has to be a consultative process. And so it's not a question of just taking it to a referendum. It is a question of, even if we do decide to go there, how what is taken to a referendum is arrived at.
Right. So that's where I'm getting at. Given that all these consultations have wrapped up, we have the draft document here, and we now want to decide that this is the best way forward. Should we go to a referendum?
Well, it depends on what comes out of that document, because that document may very well say, what are the next steps? You see? And so again, it is not, I don't think it is fair or it's a good use of our time to engage in those suppositions. I think our time has to be spent on insisting that where the will does not exist, that our politicians and our political actors begin to formulate that will.
I asked that question because I specifically did ask the Attorney General at another forum, about electoral reform. And he did say at that time that the parliamentary opposition will be consulted. There is an electoral reform committee in the National Assembly, and they will be included at that forum, at that committee. But is that enough? I mean...
Well, I sit on the Constitutional Reform Committee, and it has not met in quite a while. In fact, I think we would have had 1 or 2 meetings, and that would be to just take care of, who would chair, etc., etc.
Right. That's fair enough. But we're looking at the realistic situation here.
That would be... What would come to that committee ought to be the byproduct of far wider and more meaningful consultation on the ground.
Correct. But then again, that's where I'm getting at. The select committee, it comprises a majority of members of the government. The opposition, of course, they have their number of seats, but again, the majority comprises the government.
Right.
So, should it go to a referendum for finalization?
Well, it doesn't come to the select committee for finalization as in a blessing. It will come there to ensure that what is written fits into the parameters of the legal system, etc.
And it's within the spirit.
And it's in keeping with the spirit of the Constitution. And so the importance of consultation with the man on the ground, with the grassroots, with civic society is what would feed into whatever reforms
are included.
And therefore the PPPC has to demonstrate that spirit of inclusivity. I noticed the congressman called for a closer working partnership between the government and the opposition.
To achieve greater democracy.
That is the only way Guyana has a shot. But if you have a government that is arrogant, that does not believe that it owes the people of Guyana any information, or that the people of Guyana have no right to question and interrogate when they do things, then we are at a non-starter. Right? You cannot have a regime that believes that it could rule through fear and intimidation and through just disregard for the Constitution. Those are non-starters. The PPP has to understand that this is a different time and that Guyanese are not prepared.
And now, finally.
Are you sure?
And now, finally. You've alluded to it earlier. You have been embroiled in a situation where you were labeled as racist, among other things. You were vilified, so to speak.
Yeah.
Your party is labeled as racist because many times you see basically things that would, be in that direction or up that avenue, so to speak.
Well, in the view of the PPPC.
Are you, Amanza Desir, racist? And is your party, are you part of a racist party?
Absolutely not. Is this my camera?
Are you sure?
Let me say very, very clearly to the people of Guyana that I have been blessed to grow up in a multiracial village. My best friend in high school was a young Indian girl by the name of Homish. She passed when we were both 16. I was raised by parents who taught me not to see the texture of hair. I can't even say color of skin because that is common between the two ethnicities, but to understand and judge people on the content of their character. And so the PPPC must understand that their attempts to characterize me as a racist will not work. Will not work. The PPPC understands that as long as we can get to the bottom of this issue of race in Guyana, that it will absolutely break their stranglehold on this dear land of ours. And so any person who attempts to bring the slightest bit of enlightenment to Guyanese of whatever ethnic origin they may be, they're branded and labeled as a racist. And it is time that Guyanese stop being distracted by this age-old tactic of the PPPC and instead focus on holding them accountable to delivering that good life that Guyanese deserve. We deserve a better Guyana. We deserve a Guyana that can grow with us. Our young people deserve a Guyana that they can be proud of. They deserve a Guyana where they do not have to leave to experience the good life. But as long as we continue to be mired in racist, in racial conflicts, as long as we continue to allow the PPPC to appeal to ethnic insecurity and thereby control people through fear, Guyana will continue to be underdeveloped, and we will not be able to recognize our true potential. And so that, Wendell, is my very simple message. The PPP must know that they can't label me. They don't define who or what I am. I define that. And I'm sure as I continue in politics, the people of Guyana will get to know me, and they will see that I think the PPPC, they're terribly intimidated by this young crop of opposition MPs that they see before them, because we mean that Guyana must achieve her greatest potential. We mean that she must take her rightful place in this CARICOM and further afield. She is too rich. Guyana is too rich. She is too bountiful to be subject to international mendicancy and we're going begging cap in hand. Nonsense. Nonsense. We will not allow it to happen.
And so, Amanza, unfortunately, I'll have to take those as your closing remarks.
Thank you for having me, Wendell. It's always a pleasure.
And the pleasure is all mine. It was wonderful talking to you today. And I do hope that we were able to go beyond the surface with at least the few issues that we were able to delve into. Yeah?
Yeah. Thank you.
Having said that, you're quite welcome. And again, pleasure all ours here at Beyond the Surface, because it's a team effort. And
you guys do a fine job, actually. It's a program that I really like watching. You know, your level of production is really superior. And so keep it up. Kudos to you and your technical team for a job well done.
Thank you very much. I must say we appreciate that a whole lot.
No trouble.
And so that has brought us to the end of yet another edition of Beyond the Surface. I know that you may want for us to continue with the conversation, as there is so much more to be said. But unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. What I can assure you is that the door is always open to Mrs. Desir for her to return to this program so that we can get to know, understand her more, and have more of these conversations.
I'd be happy to come. Once we can accommodate it, I'd be more than happy to come.
Very well. And so, on behalf of the technical team, I thank you for joining us today on Beyond the Surface. It has been an absolute pleasure. As always, I do remind you to get vaccinated and observe all the protocols that have been outlined by the WHO and the government to ensure that you keep yourself safe from the COVID-19 pandemic. Until we meet again, Wendell Badrie saying so long. Take care.